Welcome everyone to Digital Humanities. I'm Alice McGrath. I'm the Digital Scholarship Specialist here at Bryn Mawr College, and I'm excited to be here for this great panel today. Our first speaker is Beth Seltzer. She'll be presenting on developing an EdTech curriculum for PhDs. She's from Stanford University, formerly from Bryn Mawr College, and her project is on a Thinking Matters Tech Coordinators, a group of postdoctoral teaching fellows who support lecture courses while developing their own digital pedagogical practices. All right, so thank you.
So as Alice said, I'm Beth Seltzer. I'm the Academic Technology Specialist at Stanford for the Introductory Studies program, which is a very sort of small liberal arts college-y piece inside of Stanford. So we work with a lot of first-year courses, very teaching-centered. So I'm going to start by describing a little bit of the context, then launch into a brief demo, and then kind of talk about next steps. The format of the Thinking Matters course, which is one of the courses, programs I work with, is it's basically like the first year critical thinking, scholarly inquiry requirement, which I think is probably familiar in some form. And the way they decided to do it is there are these big lecture courses taught by tenure-line faculty. This is a required course, so all students are required to take one, so they're pretty big courses. And then there are discussion sessions taught by postdoctoral fellows. So it's sort of like a TA thing, except instead of a graduate student doing it, there are these full-time fellows on this 3-year teaching program. The fellows come from all disciplines, and they have kind of varying roles, so they're divided into teaching teams for each course. And one of the roles that they have is to be the tech coordinator of the course. And depending on the particular requirements of the course they're working with, that could be anything from helping the faculty member plug in their computer and set up their clicker, all the way to supporting faculty who are having students live code in class, or working with kind of complex professional audio editing software. So there's really a large range of roles that these fellows are working with in their tech coordinator role. So when I came on, one of the things that I was charged with was making the tech coordinator position a little more meaningful by infusing more professional development. They said, okay, we've got these postdocs, they're about to go off on their careers, some of them are just doing this thing where they're plugging in their computers. Is there any way to make this a little bit more meaningful for them? So this offered some opportunities and challenges. I know from my own experience and some of my own research that EdTech and digital skills are really useful for PhDs. No matter, they're going on the job market, they might be saying, I want to teach at institutions very different from Stanford. To be able to say, I know a lot of digital skills could be really helpful for them. They are interested in and motivated by teaching. This is a teaching postdoc. They do get time to do their own research, but the teaching is really the focus, so they choose these fellows based on this particular interest. And also for those of us who work with faculty support in some way, they're a semi-captive audience. I won't say we get like 100% attendance at everything, but they're sort of, I can say this is a requirement to come to these sessions, and most of them will be there. They're on the same floor as I am, which is kind of helpful for tracking them down. But there are also some challenges. They have very different tech needs and very different tech experiences. So I have people who I work with who run the gamut from saying, I'm a complete Luddite, I hate technology, I never want to use it, all the way to people who are very comfortable. So definitely a kind of mixed session. They don't have their own courses. This is something that I sort of hadn't thought would be that big a challenge, but it is. So I'm sort of showing them things, and they're thinking speculatively of maybe in a couple years I might want to use this when I get to teach in this thing, but for right now they're basically acting in a kind of TA role where they have very little autonomy over the course as a whole. And they have really different disciplinary needs. It's I know that even though I've often supported a very wide range of disciplines, I think that we've tended to have more people from particular fields than others who are sort of interested in using our services, and this is really a full spectrum of STEM and social sciences and humanities, music. All these disciplines are not used to working that's been kind of a challenge for me. And the rotating quarter system. So there are kind of 3 semesters in a year, and each quarter there are some of the same fellows are acting as tech fellows and some of them aren't. So this isn't something I've cracked yet. I've only been there about 5 months, but trying to figure out how many times you can repeat workshops without alienating the people who have done it before versus which ones are so important that they sort of need to make sure you hit different cohorts. So those are the kind of challenges. So I took, I did my first attempt. So I talked to them all individually, and I said, what do you work with most, trying to look for themes? And I found out that pretty much all of them mentioned poll everywhere, which many of you may be familiar with. It's kind of online live polling that you can do in classes. So I was like, okay, they're all interested in poll everywhere in some way. Let's see. I'll do some sort of demo of the different features, and then we'll have a discussion about how they could apply it to their teaching. So I set up, this isn't live because I'm not logged into my account, but I set up a bunch of different slides showing these are all the different features of the technology. Let's walk through them, let's see what it can do, and let's talk about it. And I would say that I had kind of indifferent results for the first time. It was a pretty lecture-y presentation. I realized in retrospect, Poll Everywhere is a kind of lecture-based tool, so I realized that I had kind of reproduced some of that and saying, now everybody answer this question. It wasn't the most kind of interactive workshop I had ever done. The content was very familiar to some. One of the problems of talking to everybody and asking them what they were using is that some of them were already kind of using it extensively, and I wasn't actually telling them anything new or different. It was, I think the way I designed it, it was kind of hard for them to imagine extensions of the content beyond how they would use this tool beyond the immediate needs of the courses that they were in. So that was kind of the first attempt, which I don't think wasn't the best in the world. So for later attempts, I kind of played around with the format. And the big thing I introduced that was different was this flexible playtime. So instead of having me presenting for most of it, I tried to build in a really short intro and then a larger block where I basically said, these are a bunch of different things you could do. Pick the one that seems most relevant to you and spend 15 minutes playing around with it and pursuing it, and then we'll talk about how it could be applied for teaching. So I haven't done that many of these yet, but just to give you an example, and then we'll do a demo in a second. So the first one was on Canvas, which is their LMS. So I started off by saying, okay, here are 3 sections. One is on different ways you can use Canvas for discussion. One is on the learning analytics side, and one of it is on ways you can style your course to look better. So pick one of these 3 sections, play around with it, and then we'll sort of see what seems most relevant. I think this was really useful. Added more material, more kind of critical material, because their PhDs are kind of interested in these questions about the corporate structures behind Canvas, a little bit more about the company, about some of the critiques of this particular company, and also about the debates around what it means to use an LMS, the ways it both kind of enables privacy but also can close students off from the world, talking about student data and who owns it, things like that, and which I felt was more successful. The second one, which we're going to play around with in a second, is a workshop I did on Night Lab. Has anyone used any of these tools, like Storyline.js, StoryMap? Yeah. Pretty kind of popular tools that I was able to pull from my DH training, and so they have this kind of broader cross-disciplinary appeal. And one I just did on Monday, which was on copyright, and I did this as sort of a quiz show style, like, this is a different situation. Do you think the courts would have judged this fair use, that kind of thing? And so they got to discuss it and sort of form a bigger idea of copyright. So those are the ones I've done thus far. And so yeah, now I wanted to launch into a quick demo. So this is the Night Lab one. Let's see. So if you happen to have a device handy with you, you can go to this link, bit.ly/thinknightlab. Leave that up for a sec. So it's just a Google Docs. It's not like it's not the most exciting visual thing in the world. But basically I started by talking a little bit about NightLab, which is a set of free tools for digital storytelling developed really for professional journalists, but which have now been commandeered in a lot of academic environments. Showed a few examples of these working. There are 6 main tools that they have, and showed some examples of them out in the wild and professional news outlets. So here's one called a sound one that lets you mix in different sound effects into websites and articles. This one also has this timeline, timeline JS, which is a very popular way. Basically talking about how these are tools that enable particularly student projects to get a fairly impressive looking result with a relatively low tech hurdle. Here is the juxtapose one. Just you juxtapose 2 images. Let's see if this one loaded. This one was loading kind of slowly. This is their new kind of virtual reality one, which is really just a slideshow of 3D images. You can add some text below it. So we kind of showed some of these different tools, and then let's see how we're doing for time. Said, okay, now that you've briefly seen these different tools, take a minute to test them out. So tried to set them up. Some of them are a little easier to set up, very quick versions than others. I would say that the sound site kind of requires you to be in a web page, so I set it up, but it's just a little bit more elaborate. But maybe now, if people are willing and have devices, you could take just a second to play around with one of these things. I would say juxtapose is probably the lowest barrier to entry. So take take 3 minutes and just play around with one of these tools that you think might be useful for you or people you work with. Are there any questions or anything as people are working on this?
Were these sessions also open to faculty members?
They were not. They were just for the fellows. And that is something, I wasn't sure sort of how broadly, they weren't even open to all the fellows, they were just really for the tech coordinators and sort of part of their role. I don't know. I'm not sure faculty would come. But yeah, it's a good question.
These teaching bells, are their future audience going to be K-12, or do they want to continue on to a PhD program and teach in higher ed?
Teach in higher ed, and they already have their PhDs, so they're on a 3-year postdoctoral fellowship. So they are most of them even early in their fellowship are pretty actively on the academic job market. So if they find something, they'll cut their fellowship short and go for the permanent role. So after they've gotten a chance to use it, we kind of talked about different groups, talked about what people were sort of most drawn to, where they could see using these or not using these. And then talked a little bit about the kind of advantages and challenges of using these tools in class. It's one of those things where clearly they're relatively easy to use, lower barrier to entry. Some of them have some quirks, so if you found some quirks, that's absolutely expected. But and with it, the question of teaching a technical skill in a non-tech-based class, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of tools like this, which kind of flatten the tech, which simplify a lot of the stuff. You don't actually have to learn how to make an attractive looking presentation. You just sort of type your numbers into a Google Doc and you get something that looks very pretty. And that was an interesting discussion for me. I was coming from Bryn Mawr, where we have this focus on the digital competencies and what students are developing. And so I was sort of taking for granted that was something people were thinking about and concerned about. And some of the fellows said, yeah, I think that's important. And some of them said, do we really, like, isn't it better to, are we in a world where, like, you should just be able to type in your numbers and create a beautiful looking timeline? Isn't that a more realistic reflection of what the world is and ought to be? And maybe it's not my job to teach them these tech skills. So it was an interesting kind of question there that didn't have any clear answer. So to wrap up, my kind of next steps and questions, one of them is scheduling, trying to figure out how exactly to sustain this model and not repeat too much, but also not go too far afield, not do things that are going to become increasingly more obscure and less relevant to the group. Finding more broadly interesting topics and tools. How many tools are there that really appeal to a really wide cross-disciplinary audience? And also thinking through other potential solutions. This is a kind of very traditional, like, okay, I'm supposed to do professional development, I'm going to do a workshop series. So I'm curious to sort of continue experimenting with different formats and models. Yeah, so that's my presentation. Thank you all.